So, quite some time ago, I did I don't know if it was a review or what, of my viewing of Blake 7. And since then, not long after I finished that, I started looking at The Survivors, another slightly earlier television series for the BBC by the same person, Terry Nation. And actually, similarly to Blake 7, he starts out writing all the episodes and then starts handing them off to people. However, that ends up working. I don't think it worked that well in Blake 7, and to tell you the truth, I think it lost a certain continuity in The Survivors as well, which, if I didn't mention, is that other show. The story is kind of interesting in that, in the very first one, so you shouldn't watch this if you're thinking about watching the show, because I probably end up giving things away that, I don't know, at least I enjoyed the surprise factor of them between seasons, whatever. I ended up watching fairly solidly to begin with, and then kind of slowed down and ended up stopping last fall. For no real reason. Just, my wife had gotten here, and I just kind of slowed down with wanting to do that. We were playing games, or I was playing games, or whatever, and getting addicted to the television shows on my computer wasn't really what I wanted to do. But I ended up digging it back up within the last couple days. I was ill. I've been doing game videos still, but I haven't been feeling well. And, it's kind of nice to watch a television show every now and then when you're not feeling terribly well. And this was one that was recommended to me by an old school friend of mine, really, who I haven't seen since my first year in college or something. I don't really remember for sure. But, so a long time ago, but through the magics of Facebook, well, actually not, through the magics of, I don't know why. I'm not sure why I'm in contact with him. Because he's not on Facebook. Somehow he emailed me, found me out through email or something, I don't know. But Facebook has been really great about linking up old friends that I'll probably never see again, but it's just kind of cool to be somewhat connected to them. Most of them probably have me on ignore, but anyway, back to the show. It's, back to my story of the show. I ended up picking it back up and just finishing off the last half of the third season. I ran 3 seasons. The story, you're probably familiar with it from the modern remake of it, essentially, although it's not officially a remake. It's made off the novels that were made off the show, but I don't know anything about the modern show whatsoever. I just was recommended, hey, if you liked Blake 7, I liked this even better, and I went back to look at it, and it was kind of compelling in a way. So Blake 7, unfortunately, like many of the science fiction shows of its time, had kind of iffy acting, to say the least. But the acting and the direction and the choices, you could see the characters really in the role, in almost all cases, throughout. You really felt like they were feeling some of the issues. There were some very nice camera shots throughout, catching just these tiny little human actions. Very almost touching, in a way that I don't think you see on anything modern. And really, I don't know if you saw it on American TV at that time. I'm trying to remember what I was seeing on there. Just there weren't these little. The acting just wasn't as good. The direction wasn't as good. You weren't getting that same feeling of of talent and skill. Even when there were talented and skilled people involved in it, it was being produced in a way to denude and strip. And what I've seen of modern television, at least a few years ago, didn't impress me one bit either. So, I guess kind of one of the things is to look at the story, and it really separates into 3 seasons that are fairly distinct. The first season centered around the key character being Abby Grant. And I should just use first names because that's all I have written down here. And then with attachment to her, Greg Preston, who finds her on the road and meets up with her. There's actually multiple, but Abby's one of the main ones, and Jenny is also very major at this point. Greg gets kind of met along the way. You don't see his story in the same way that you see Jenny and Abby right from the beginning. But all 3 of them become very important, traveling together and not really in any kind of romantic relationship, although eventually Greg and Jenny can outcome, as a way to keep him there. But the storyline besides sort of settling on this, it is a post-apocalyptic scenario. This great plague has spread throughout the world, and in particular we're looking at England. And these are people, the few who have survived, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it's like less than 1%, and all of society has broken down. So they're kind of scavenging a lot of, I don't know, sort of the moral project type feel, or maybe even some Car Wars type stuff, although none of that. But in terms of this, it is this post-apocalyptic scenario, and some groups are beginning to band together and be, turn into gangs even. In some cases, they're just trying to farm together. But at the very earliest stage, they're really just kind of traipsing the woods, looking for places where they can stop and live for a little bit. And there's this dynamic where Greg doesn't really want to settle down anywhere, and both Abby and Jenny do. There's a separate side story, which is Abby lost her child, and she wants to go search for him. And he was away when this all hit. She doesn't know if he's alive or dead. So that's the sort of beginning of it. But as they're sitting around the campfire, Abby is espousing something she picked up. I don't remember off whom, but basically she talked to someone on the route and got infected with this idea that in order to start over again, we have to learn the primitive arts. And she sort of combines this settling down, learning how to live in the wilderness by primitive means, without electricity, without whatever, along with, as she starts seeing the bands, the brigands, etc. Well, we also have to kind of unite, because if we don't form big enough groups, we'll be prey. And those groups may not be able to live all in one farm, but by attaching and coordinating and all this, maybe we'll be able to form something more solid. And if you look at the progression of the show as a whole, it seems to launch from there. But there's a bit of jaggedness between the different seasons. And in fact, sometimes in the midst of seasons, where it feels as though these ideas are just kind of being shuffled, and somebody, especially once new authors or writers are taking over, somebody's just focusing on one thing. So on some of the shows, it'll be Abby hunting her kid is the biggest thing. And in some of them, it's driving off the bandits and just living and dealing, coping with the day-to-day survival. And then in some of them, and these were the most interesting to me, there was the trying to coordinate the different local farms for defense and build this local government. That didn't go far. But at the very end of the first season, if I recall correctly, it looks like everybody's getting together. And Abby's found this guy who becomes her lover while Greg and Jenny have gotten together. This guy is, I don't know, some dispossessed nobleman who fought to get his manor back from a bunch of fairly well-meaning people who just weren't willing to take his orders or something. And it felt like it was going to expand from there almost directly. But then on the second, it's kind of left in this air, left up in the air situation as to what's going to happen with Abby. Is she going to be this, unifying force, which she sort of seemed to have been, and are we going to go into more depth on that? Or does she break away and go look for her kid? Well, at the start of the second season, it becomes apparent. At the end of the first season, it seems like she's going to go look for her kid. And then everything changes on, the last 10 minutes or 20 minutes of the last show. And it looks like, oh, actually she's going to be the figurehead and, gather these people together and everything. Now, when you start the second season, she's just gone. She went looking for her kid. That was very disconcerting to me. Probably there was some sort of contract negotiation going on, which caused all that. She held out, a branch or something, and it seemed like they were going to go on, and then they decided now she was. Whatever, it was very disturbing. But what's weird, it didn't feel terribly like the world had gotten better, and this whole coordination with the other groups and everything seems to have just collapsed from everybody's mind. The second season was mainly filled with day-to-day survival at a slightly higher level, although they had been there before. The place burnt down and they went and found another place and started over. They would people would come wandering in, there would be some terrible problem, people would then wander out. It didn't seem like they were growing a bigger community. They were just sort of this waypoint for people who you never would see again. They would maybe be there for 2 or 3 episodes, and then it was decided, oh no, that's not good. And it ended up being a very, very small group left at the very end, where this balloonist comes, and he's found dead, but he's got notes with symbols on them on a map. Unfortunately, everything's written in Norwegian, but I think at the end of that first series, Greg goes off and finds some Norwegian chick, the guy's daughter, who can translate the notes. And they start to come to this idea of, okay, well, we're going to try to do this. What this guy's plan was to hook up, the power. They had hydroelectric power in Norway, but no food, and try to work out trading. Well, I think, I'm not really clear on where the different seasons break, but I think the third season starts out with, and I may be missing half of maybe this latter part of the second season, ends up with, I missed something in the second season that's kind of big. I'll jump back to it a bit. But it ends up with Greg sailing off in a balloon to go to Norway with this Norwegian girl. And the rest of them kind of trying to hook up a phone line among some of the communities. But all the other earlier government stuff, all their close, the things they were trying to link to, that's just been forgotten. It stayed in the same farm, but it was all just forgotten. Well, okay, so going back to the other thing, somewhere in the midst, after their manor burns down, their first farm that they lived on, and they have to move to another one, they go to a place run by this guy, Charles. Now, they've run into him before in the first episode. And that was a really weird scenario. All these little weird scenarios in some of the shows, sometimes stretching more than one show, where, they visit some people on their way to trying to find, some medicine or whatever. And in this case, they visited, and this guy had a bunch of sick, pregnant women all knocked up by him, it turns out. And I mean, on first impression, he came off a little skeevy. Kind of like, well, this is a weird guy. And that's Charles. And then, when he kind of makes a pass at Abby, and actually at Jenny as well, to kind of, hey, you should be carrying my baby, or someone's. Because that's his whole thought at that point. Well, then later they come back to him. After their manor burns down, they come back to his farm, and kind of all join his small group. But his group isn't what it was before. The group he had before had been larger, and there may have been some explanation given, but he's hooked up with one woman, and I don't know, I don't remember terribly which people came with them and which didn't. But the whole, he started being portrayed as this leader type. Maybe as Abby's replacement, the guy with the ideas that weren't just technical. Although he was more interested in the technical side of things than Abby had been. Abby had been into the self-sufficiency. Greg was an engineer who wanted to get things working, and with Abby, he was just basically, hey, we can get this motor working and it'll help us. If we could get a mill working, that would be great. With Charles and Greg, the whole dynamic changes between leader and engineer. And in fact, it's always questionable who's the leader. Abby and Greg sort of share it, and Charles and Greg kind of share it while they're together. But it becomes much more, we can link up all these really disparate communities with phone lines and stuff. And then when the Norwegian comes, that is sort of the, yes, we have the notes for it, we have these, really this distribution system already being planned, let's do this instead. Okay, that's great. But again, kind of jarring to me. It's like the tenor is just moving around too much there. It's an interesting show, no doubt there, but some of these motions disturbed me. In the same way with Blake 7, it disturbed me what seemed like a very straightforward rebellion at one point. Changed its flavor completely with this random war happening. Everything kind of became less sensible to me. Well, in the same way, this keeps a stronger pattern throughout, I think, but it's got these jarring shifts in it. All right. Before we go to the third season, I want to talk about one particular thing that there were a couple of bad guy characters who weren't really bad in the sense of they weren't, the evil, nefarious one that they're fighting for, say, I don't know, 2 shows or something, and then either run away from or just disappears, or maybe they beat him all, kill him, or whatever. And in the first one, I think it's this guy named Vic, who, when he first meets Jenny, is just kind of this weird, wacky guy, kind of a homeless guy or a hobo or something, but he seems pretty harmless. But then he starts turning worse as it goes on. When you first meet him, he's just sort of this comical relief in a couple of the shows, and for some reason they brought him back initially to be in that position. but he's constantly kind of boning things. He's lazy, and he ends up, murdering someone and being executed by Greg, actually. Pretty heavy action there, or whatever. And then they get someone to kind of replace him in this guy named Hubert, who starts out in the second season, I believe, but whatever. When he first shows up, he seems like the same kind of lazy, cantankerous person, and then it seems to be following the same path where he's about to, he drives someone off, he gets someone accused of witchcraft, he's just really screwing people over, and then something kind of shifts. He starts doing better things. He's still the same grumpy, cranky, lazy guy, but he stops boning everything. And really, in the third season, there's a couple of places where he just saves people's lives. And in fact, I think he does it about 3 or 4 times in fairly quick succession, considering. Where he's just doing these kind of, the first time it's kind of feels out of the character, the second time, but he's sort of becoming almost this heroic character in his own way, and it's kind of interesting to see him shifting in a way that the first bad, lazy guy didn't. So going to that third season, it shifts completely. In the midst of the season, it's almost as if there's these huge jumps. So the season is kind of them. It starts out them looking for Greg. Greg's somewhere. He came over from Norway, and we're going and looking for him, right? And I don't know. I'm not sure that's the third season. That may be. But anyway, I see this shift that happened, and it may have been between the second and third. The second may have been Greg going off, and then a little bit after that. But the third season, he's not with the group. He's not in any of the shows anymore. It's pretty much Charles and Jenny striking out at various times to find out what's up with Greg. And eventually they hook up with Agnes, who is the Norse girl, and end up, finding out, oh, he's alive and he's been doing these things. And it just, it doesn't really seem like he's doing much for a while. And then at some point or another, you start seeing these connections that have been made that couldn't have been made since he got there. He hadn't been gone that long. He hadn't been back that long. But, there's a group that's got a railroad running, and just all kinds of stuff. And to some extent, Charles and Jenny and Agnes end up connecting some of those societies together. And it becomes all about connecting the production and trying to get trade going. But even very late in that, they get a market going in sort of their center area for the first time. And there's like a half dozen people who show up. A woman with a couple of chickens, a guy with a pig. Pretty minor. Right? Then it almost barrels into something else where they're come up with a plan not to get electricity from Norway anymore, but to get it from Scotland, which makes a lot more sense. There are power lines there, right? And they do this really by running into an electrical engineer who they convince to work for them. And he starts, pressing to turn on all the power switches and just turn on the hydroelectric in Scotland, and then they'll have energy and everything will be great. There's sort of some sort of military group that somehow Greg runs into, or accidentally, basically. And they're also trying to set up their own industrial base, but are a little harsher in their motive, their methodology, and they end up basically, threatening, stabbing him, threatening his little farm family, and well, he basically single-handedly wipes them all out. But on the very last show, or on the last few shows, not the very last, on the last few shows, it's like there's this whole network just in place now. All this trading's going on. People are taking money with Greg Preston's name on it from Agnes. And she's like shifted into this little military dictator who's, kind of bluffing people with money that isn't backed by anything, but trying to get currency to spark everything over. And it just, again, it feels like it made this weird shift, and the commander of that military organization tries to penetrate their headquarters, ends up getting caught. But now finally there's going to be a government, a governing council getting together and talking things out. And of course, like with the first time that was going to happen, it just doesn't get shown. It does not get shown at all. They showed one council meeting between the villages, I think, in the first season, and then decided, oh, nobody wants this. Well, that's actually what I was watching the show always for, was to see the politics develop. And instead they sort of jerked around, from, oh, we're happy, kind of anarcho-communists, and then to, oh yeah, we're kind of a military dictatorship actually, but, that's okay. We're a federated dictatorship. And then at the very end, they go up and essentially turn on the power in Scotland. And that's it. And, as a character portrayal of many of these characters, as a story it's lacking. It's too jagged, too jerking all over. But for the moments where the characters are really there, and really, and it's very cool. And you can kind of tie the little pieces together. It's just the whole picture doesn't go together well. And that's the same problem with Blake 7. I don't feel like, I don't know, I can't remember, back in the long distant past when my mom and I would watch Dallas, I can't remember whether or not that felt like it kind of worked one show after the other, except for, last season was all a dream. But this definitely does not feel like the proper continuity was maintained. And it's not, it's attempting to be a single storyline running through, and it just doesn't feel like it manages it as well as it should have. For something, I don't know. And, again, Blake 7 had the same problem, I think. There would be this theme, sort of slash away for a little bit, and go to something else, and that's okay. But it would often take turns that seemed almost as though the focus became a discontinuity, or the actual, I don't know. It just often felt too jagged for my taste. Now, I guess that's really all I greatly want to say about it. The spirit and mood of it, though, of course I'm going to talk longer because I like babbling. The spirit and mood is very good across the board. Some of the countryside is just absolutely gorgeous. Just it's coming from Wales in particular most of the time, because it's largely untouched. Because they fled from any kind of urban area at all and gotten into the country as much as possible. So that's very nice. They almost always open up with a really, really pretty scene, often in the rain, especially when they're traveling, in the woods or up on a scenic view or something. Just really, really nice, really nice video work being done. Film work in that time, of course. But yeah, I thought I'd give some impressions of this because I know some people watched the Blake 7 one, and I thought it would be nice to give a similar feeling of impressions on this. I don't tend to watch a lot of television, so digging up an old series like this, well, these are definitely treasures, and I think well worth spending the time watching in a sort of different way from, say, I don't know, whatever it is that attracts people to normal television. Although I have to admit I've been grabbing shows of like The Daily Show recently. I don't know what else to do. Sometimes I don't want to be playing a game. And I don't want to be reading rules, and I don't have much else to read other than rules and computer books. If I had books, this wouldn't be a problem. I'm kind of afraid of computer games. So this is kind of a reasonable alternative, I guess. Alright, off it goes.